So, how do you judge a leader? I mean, really think about it. Is it about their character, the laws they signed, or what if we used a standard that isn't even human? Today, we're going to explore the different ways we hold power to account, and we're using the presidency of George W. Bush as a pretty fascinating case study. Okay, so let's just dive right in. The story really starts with this central contradiction of the man himself. On the one hand, you have the patrician, the guy who went to elite schools like Phillips Academy and Yale, who was even in the super secret Skull and Bones Society. But then, on the other hand, there was this very carefully built persona of the everyman, the easygoing Texas governor, the baseball team owner who just talked like a regular guy. All right, so here's our roadmap for this whole explainer. We're going to start with the man and his contradictions. Then we'll zoom out to look at the institutions he left behind. After that, things get a little weird. We'll explore a radical new legal idea, then zoom way in on a really unique personal crusade, and we'll end with a huge question. Who really gets the final say? So let's get into our first section. This is all about how we usually tell the story of a leader, through their biography and the identity they show the world. And this is just a perfect example of that contradiction we were talking about. George W. Bush was actually the very first U.S. president to have an MBA, and from Harvard of all places. But at the same time, he loved to play up this average student image, which, to be fair, his 2.35 GPA from Yale definitely supports. It's this gap between the high-flying business credentials and the just one of the guys academic record that's so key to his story. And this is where it all came together, in this political identity he built called compassionate conservatism. And man, was it effective. He framed himself as a uniter, not a divider, pointed to his work with Democrats in Texas, and was really open about his personal story, overcoming his struggles with alcohol and finding his faith. It was this powerful mix that let him appeal to moderates and his conservative base all at once. But, accountability isn't just about one person's life story. It's about the big, clunky institutions they create and leave behind, the systems that just keep going long after they're gone. So let's widen the lens now and look at that institutional record. His time in office was just defined by one massive crisis after another, and each one created these huge new systems. Think about it. After 9/11, you get the authorization for indefinite detention, which leads directly to Guantanamo Bay. You have the No Child Left Behind Act, which totally reshaped education. The invasion of Iraq, the response to the 2008 financial crash. These weren't just one-off decisions. They were the blueprints for new, lasting institutions. And if you want to know how lasting, just look at this number. As of 2025, there are still 15 people being held at Guantanamo Bay. That's not just some historical fact. It's a living, breathing consequence of a policy from over 20 years ago. See, that's the thing with institutions. Once they're built, they have their own momentum, and they are incredibly hard to take apart. And behind that number are actual human beings. I mean, some people, like the alleged 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, have been stuck in pretrial hearings for more than a decade. Others have been cleared for transfer for years but are just stuck. Their cases are all tangled up in these special military commissions. They're like courts, but outside the normal justice system. And everything just grinds to a halt, often because of the huge legal headache of dealing with evidence that may have come from torture. And this whole accountability gap thing, it's not just about prisons. It goes right to the money. Get this. The Department of Defense, despite being required to do it for decades, holds the unique honor of being the only federal agency to have never, ever passed a full financial audit. Okay, so we've looked at the man and the systems he built. But what if the whole way we even think about accountability, biographies, courts, audits, what if that's all just wrong? Let's take a look at a really radical alternative that tries to judge power by a completely different yardstick. The idea is called organic law. And just try to wrap your head around this. The argument is that the ultimate law isn't something written by governments, but by the universe itself. The real laws are the laws of nature, ecology, biology, simple cause and effect. And if any human-made law breaks those laws, then it's not a real law. It's totally illegitimate. It's a pretty wild idea, but you can actually see echoes of it in things like the environmental justice movement. And it really builds on this classic philosophical idea you've probably heard before. An unjust law isn't a law at all. If a government law violates some higher moral or natural law, it basically just doesn't count. And this isn't just a thought experiment. The people who came up with this actually created an organic criminals registry. In their system, you can indict not just people, but whole corporations and even governments for crimes against the planet. So you see entries like ExxonMobil for climate change deception, the entire US government for illegal wars, and a specific person, Donald Rumsfeld, listed as a career organic criminal.
So, looking through this lens, the 2003 invasion of Iraq stops being a political debate. It becomes a multi-layered crime against life itself. It gets classified as an illegal war of aggression, as homicide on a massive scale, as ecocide, which means destroying the environment, and as a crime of deception because it was sold on false pretenses.
All right, let's totally shift gears. We're going to go from that huge, universal, philosophical way of looking at things and zoom all the way in to see how holding people accountable can become a really personal, individual mission, like a citizen-led campaign to rewrite history.
So meet Marie Landry. She's an independent researcher, and her mission, which she actually calls Rumsfeldology, is all laid out in these emails she sends to government officials. As she says right here, her whole goal is to clear the Bush name by putting the spotlight somewhere else.
And in her emails, some of which she sent to an address linked to the Skull and Bones Society, which is a wild little callback to the beginning, she basically boils down her whole case to these two hashtags. Her argument is simple. The person to blame for the biggest messes of the Bush era wasn't the president, but his Secretary of Defense. So the core of her whole argument, Rumsfeldology, is that it was Donald Rumsfeld's personality, his arrogance, and his opportunistic strategies that were the real engine behind things like the Iraq War. It's this amazing example of a citizen trying to change the official story, to shift the blame from one person in power to another. So what have we done here? We've just looked at 4 completely different ways to think about accountability for the exact same period in history, and each one asks a different question and, no surprise, comes up with a different answer. Let's just run through them one last time. First, you've got the biographer's view, which is all about a person's character. Then there's the institutional record, which looks at the systems that last, like Guantanamo Bay. Then you have that huge philosophical judgment of organic law, which basically puts the whole system on trial. And finally, you have the citizens' crusade, trying to reassign blame within that system. Which really just leaves us with this final question for you. When we look back at history, at the people who shape it, which one of these frameworks actually matters the most? Is it the biographer telling the story, the court weighing the evidence, the philosopher with a universal standard, or the citizen who just won't let it go? In the end, who really gets to deliver the final verdict?